Great morning, world. Great morning, humans. This is your boy, the Dragon, coming to you live. And we are streaming. So, this is our Monday edition, our live Monday edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, which doesn't end up on the podcast. This is just a video stream that we do live on Mondays. And its purpose is to help you get your head screwed on straight today, to give you a little bit of a fresh perspective on some things that you know, but sometimes leave in your blind spot or sometimes get confused with and just move on. The danger of every day when we wake up is that we don't capture the ability to think consciously for ourselves and make some important decisions in the morning. So our Make Sense Mondays version of this podcast is where we go over some things that are going to end up on the podcast, like this concept that I'm going to share with you today is going to end up on the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, which is moving towards 1 million downloads, which is really crazy to think about. But it makes sense because it's something that I'm passionate about and I keep doing no matter what. So in any case, welcome everybody. As people start to, come in live, we've got this streaming on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, I believe. So if you have any comments, I'll be able to see them in the in this interface that I have, and we can chit chat a little bit. So as people start to come in, I just want to say great morning to you. You can see here that I have this URL code. I have a free Substack newsletter that comes out usually about 3 times a week, and it's kind of a series of just, once again, things that make you go, things that are always happening in our lives, but we just, for whatever reason, decide to not look at them. Maybe it takes too much work, or maybe it's too confusing, or maybe we just find it easier to just hand the keys of trust over to our day. But that's what I consider dangerous. I think it's dangerous. And what I mean by dangerous is there's risk associated with allowing whatever happened even yesterday to boot up and run its course again today, your regularly scheduled program, rather than taking command of your day. And in order for you to take command of your day, it would require that you consciously grab or arm yourself with the awareness of the fact that you have a choice today. I find that in life, we always have this ability to take the blue pill or the red pill. And I love that analogy from the Matrix, because what it reminds us is that the blue pill is the pill that you take that has you wake up in your regularly baseline, regularly scheduled program, and you just run that course again today and see how it goes. You kind of know how that one's going to go. But then there's the red pill. And that's what this show is. This show is kind of like a pink pill, where you get access to the red pill, right? To look at things with a fresh new perspective and a different vantage point, and execute on this idea of changing the way that you look at things so that the things that you look at change. That's the pink pill, right? But the red pill would be the one where you actually embrace it and say, I'm going to remain open and curious today. And I am going to be open to acknowledging some things that I typically wouldn't acknowledge, but also openly acknowledge that you might not be right about some things. So this is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And you'll see that in my writing, and you'll see that in my podcast and my work. It's just this idea of handing the keys of consciousness and perspective over to humans, so that they can seek a better version of the truth in their days. So welcome. There's my long-winded introduction to what the heck this is. So you can take my podcast and my blog and these Make Sense Mondays and use them as tools, as fuel, right? To help you further your unfuckwithableness. There's another way of saying it. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing to be able to go through this day and decide what it is that you want, decide what you're going to go do to get it, and not let anything get in the way of it, especially things that don't matter, right? Wouldn't that be cool to be able to determine what matters and what doesn't, what's in your control and what is not? So we're going to talk about this idea of trying to control the uncontrollables today. And this is called the KnowGap. So I've come up with some new concepts, some new words that I've made up based on observations. So this is about why we sabotage ourselves and how we break that cycle. So if you're somebody that understands self-sabotage, then you're going to like this. So just a quick reminder, you've got the Substack here. If you take your phone while you're watching this video and scan that QR code, you'll get access to my free newsletter. But also the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast is primarily sponsored. We have sponsors on the show, which is crazy. I heard a sponsor the other day that played before my episode, and it was selling weed gummies. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But we stay away from religion, politics, anything controversial and opinionated. But I guess the Rise Up with Dragon, that was my old show. The Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast is sponsored by weed gummies every now and then. So that's kind of hip. That's kind of cool. But we're primarily funded by what's called the Make Sense Academy. And that's our psychological safe haven. That's where I've taken all of my life's work. The headspace, I've created a system that has not only saved my life, but helped me navigate change and handle adversity with grace and become this person that has the same thoughts and feelings and concerns and worries and anxiety and feelings of depression and fear and all of those things. I have the same things as you. I'm worried about money. I'm worried about status. I'm worried about death. I worry about the same things as you. But I have a system that I put in place that helps me navigate it and not get distracted, not fall prey to things like procrastination or dig myself into a hole, and rather than climbing out, continue digging. So that's what the interface response system's for. And that is what the primary concept that we teach in the Make Sense Academy. So we arm and equip people with that. But then from that place, we have live masterminds, and we have all of the coursework and tools that I've ever created and that I ever will create all in there. And we're even now getting into AI and leveraging our businesses and things like that. So we're streaming on our Instagram as well, and that is at Dr. JC Doornick. So hello to anybody that's watching on Instagram. I believe the way I have it set up, if you comment, I'll be able to see it through this interface. So let's talk about this. I'm going to read the intro to this because what I want to do is I want to introduce and put a name to something that you know about, but that is probably in your blind spot. And the reason why this would be effective to put a name to it and point it out to you is that it'll arm you with the awareness of it, and you'll be able to catch yourself in it. And once you can catch yourself drifting in life, it lays the foundation for shifting. We call that drifting and shifting. So I was initially fascinated. Think about this for a second. I was initially fascinated with this idea that, human beings can come to know something for certain. There's certain things that we just know, and those fall under the category of logic and rationale. Yet we for some reason, we struggle to add it into the equation when we're processing things, when we're deciding what matters and what doesn't, and when we're reacting to things. We have this weird ability to take something that we know for sure and forget about it when we're in the interface with things. And I'll explain what that means, but I've determined that this is what I call, and this is a fully made up name, I call this the KnowGap. Okay, so we're going to talk about the KnowGap, and I'm also going to insert another term that is a side effect and symptom and an action step of being in the no gap, and that's called the shadow gap. So here we go. Let's have some fun here. So we've all been there, right? Some of you might be there right now. We've all been there, and you know that you can't control things like the weather, yet you curse the rain. Isn't that funny? You know that you can't force people to change. Oh boy, this is a tough one. You can't force people to change, yet you waste hours trying to do so. You know procrastination hurts you and gets you nowhere, just like not setting goals. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. You know that, yet you hide in the busyness of what we call fake work, ignoring the actual tasks that move you forward and give you the life and the things that matter most. You know these things. I know these things as well. So how do we have this ability to know something and still find ourselves doing something that contradicts what we know? How do we have this ability to step into this thing called the no gap? Why do we do this? So in this episode, what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to free flow here. I'm not going to do it like the podcast episode. So we're going to learn the names of these two hidden patterns that I've identified that I guess you could say quietly sabotage our peace, productivity, and process, or progress, not process. So these are things that are sabotaging us. And once you know about them, you'll be able to identify. I'll give you an example. The amazing Jim Dethmer, who wrote the book 15 Laws of Conscious Leadership, he taught this concept of recognizing that you're either above or below the line. And if you're above the line, you're open, you're curious, and you're accepting full responsibility for your life. If you're below the line, you're a victim, you're closed, you're blaming people, you're justifying your position. We spend most of the time there. But by teaching us that language of being able to identify whether we're above or below the line, that's arming ourselves the awareness of our present moment, like this is, that this is gonna, and it doesn't matter where you are, above or below the line, or if you're in or out of a no gap or a shadow gap. What matters is that you have the ability to recognize that you are. So this is about arming and equipping yourself with the awareness of something so that you could become aware of it. If it doesn't have a name, you might find yourself just oscillating in life and not understanding why. So I'm going to teach you how to identify that. So there's two terms that I'm going to share with you. And one is called the no gap. And the no gap is when you mysteriously forget something that you know and waste time oscillating in life. You forget about something that just is. You forget about the isness of life, and you find yourself oscillating in life because of that forgetfulness. And then the secondary part of that is called the shadow gap. And we know that there's a lot of people that talk about shadow work. What's interesting about the shadow, by the way, is it's behind you. So what's interesting is when you're in the no gap, you have this ability to allow yourself or allow your conditioned mind to avoid responsibility. See, we actually give ourselves permission to avoid responsibility. As a health coach, somebody that helps people with health and nutrition and weight loss and all of those things, I very often see people claim that they cheat on program. This is part of the shadow gap, but it's a side effect of the no gap. So when I ask them what happened, they'll claim that some sort of outside force made them do it. The devil made me do it, or something like that. But what I help them see, and I guide them to this process, is that they actually gave themselves permission to do something other than what they had set out to do. That's what the shadow gap is. The shadow gap is when you allow your conditioned mind to avoid responsibility by focusing on the uncontrollable. So if you get busy with busy work or fake work, stuff that doesn't move you forward today, that's the shadow gap. You're letting your shadow, rather than trailing behind you, you're letting your shadow or your ego or your conditioned mind call the shots. So the no gap, prompts the shadow gap. So we're going to unpack the brain science behind these patterns, explore the emotional traps, and keep that, that keep us stuck in this sense. And more importantly, give you some practical tools to break free from it. So we're going to be together for about another 10 minutes. So just know that if you subscribe to the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, pretty hard to not find because of the name and the glasses. So when you go onto your podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, or whatever, it's all over the world, you'll see a yellow box with these glasses, which in reality have no lenses. So let's talk a little bit about this. So the KnowGap is, that space where we put on the shelves that which we know for whatever reason, and we start trying to control the uncontrollables. So examples of KnowGaps, just to give you some color, we know we can't control other people. Like in business, you could manipulate people and you could leverage your business success. But when it comes down to other people doing things, we can't control them. So if your business model requires other people to do things, the only sensible thing for you to do is to have so many people in the running to follow through that some will. But if your business model requires like 3 people to follow through on what they said they're going to do, well, that would be a KnowGap. That would be you forgetting and getting upset about it, forgetting. And the shadow gap would be you trying to change them. But the KnowGap would be you forgetting about that. So we know that we can't control outcomes. So that's why we always say detach from the outcome. That's a KnowGap. That's the gap between which we know and this idea that we can change the reality. We can change the laws of the universe. We know that we can only control our response. This is an interesting part of the KnowGap, and one that I see all the time and that I experience all the time. We all have this knee-jerk reflex that is part of our conditioned response, right? And it's a survival tactic. It's the same stress response system that we use to jump out of the way of a speeding car. But when we're just in the interplay and the interface of life, we know that we don't control what's happening. We only control our response. But we forget about that and we allow our knee-jerk response, which doesn't even ask us permission. We allow our knee-jerk response to just do its thing, when we know that that's an ineffective approach. So that's why in the Make Sense Academy, and part of the interface response system, we teach people to dispute the thoughts and feelings that you're having before you allow them to prompt the knee-jerk reflex. And we teach the idea of saying, which stands for haven't made up my mind yet. So we empower people just to break free from that KnowGap, that you get to think about things first, right? I mean, don't not jump out of the way of a speeding car. But if somebody says something, or if you notice something, or somebody doesn't follow through, before you go into these unhealthy, inefficient, ineffective structures, dispute it and just say, is this something that I can't control? If you can learn how to do that and remove yourself from trying to control the controllables, what you'll find is that the people that succeed at the highest, and I'm not just talking about money, are the people that spend their time and energy and focus on the things they control. And they're very, very efficient at releasing from things quickly that they don't control. So they don't spend a lot of time in the KnowGap. They might have their own KnowGap. And they also don't allow themselves to step into the shadow gap. So let's talk a little bit about the science of this. Why do we fall into the KnowGap? And I think it's pretty obvious, but it's the way that our brains are wired. We fall into the KnowGap and often slip into an even sneakier trap, which is a side effect of it as a result of it, and that's called the shadow gap. When we knowingly or unconsciously avoid responsibility by chasing control, right? Chasing control over the uncontrollable. So we try to control the uncontrollable, and we'll get to more on the shadow gap in a second. So the brain operates with really 2 primary systems. Let me give you a little bit of the science. And there's so much more underlying in these systems, but you basically have the prefrontal cortex, right? The front of your brain. And that's where that's the highest level of consciousness. That's the part of your brain that you can become aware of. And that's where things like logic, planning, long-term focus happen. But then you have the limbic system, which is the emotional compartment of your brain. And that's where we have threat detection and survival responses. So you've heard of the concept that 95% of our brain capacity is unconscious, and we only have 5%. What they're 5% conscious. So what that means is that the front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO that makes the final decision, that's the 5%. The rest of the things that are happening without you knowing. So that's how we can easily fall into a KnowGap. We can fall into this oscillating pattern of trying to build an airplane in the sky, teach a goldfish to climb a tree, or even worse, trying to drink water with a fork in life. Are you trying to drink water with a fork in your life right now? Chances are you are. So if you think about this idea of like times in your life, maybe even when you're in flow, when we're calm, the prefrontal cortex is kind of like running the show when you're not in a heightened emotional state. But when we're triggered, right, and that alarm system goes off, which we call the amygdala, your system gets hijacked. Your decision-making system gets hijacked, and that pushes you into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I think you know what fight, flight, or freeze is, but fawn is when we over accommodate. And that's a very KnowGap, Shadowgap type thing. Remember, I've made up the KnowGap and the Shadowgap thing. So that's why you can know that you can't control others, but still find yourself spiraling into the anxiety driven micromanagement of trying to control other people. You'll find yourself saying like, I don't understand. Why can't you just do this? Or you might even seek mentorship and say, how do I get this person to do this? And if that mentor listened to this episode, they would say, you're in a KnowGap right now. And then for the people that disregard the KnowGap and keep moving forward, they enter the Shadowgap, where they allow themselves to try to drink water with the fork. So basically, they're allowing their conditioned mind that came up with this idea to start taking action. You want to be conscious when you're in action, not unconscious, right? And once again, in health coaching, when somebody is overweight, the worst part about it is not the aesthetics, and it's not even the detriment to your health. It's the feeling of out of control, that you can't control something. So this is about claiming control. And the first step would be to know what a KnowGap is, and now you have a name to it. And I'm really looking forward to some feedback on this. Once you know what a KnowGap is, you can start to dispute thoughts and feelings by saying something like, am I in a KnowGap right now? Or if you find yourself trying to drink water with a fork, you can ask yourself, is this a Shadowgap? And if you can identify that, that's called catching yourself drifting. And once you do, now you have a fighting chance to make a choice. So for those of you in the Make Sense Academy that listen to this, this is just another addition to what we call your sorting filter. When, we teach people to process things through a sorting filter that is disputing and asking questions. Is this in my control? Is this out of my control? Does this matter? Is this real, or did I make it up? So now you have the ability to ask yourself, is this a KnowGap? Am I in a KnowGap? And if you catch yourself in a KnowGap and you're forgetting about something that you know, and by the way, this is powerful stuff, because there's some of you out there that have bought into concepts and theories, and I don't want to even mention the arenas that these are in, because you'll probably get your feathers ruffled. But there's things that you know that you also know are just not so, but you choose to have a bias, a cognitive bias over anything other than what you know, to protect yourself from the fear of what your life would be like if you were wrong. That's why we're so scared. So some of you are in a no gap and maybe listening to this message right now and realizing you're in a no gap, but have the power to override that acknowledgement, that awareness with a cognitive bias. And the easiest way for you to do that would be to stop listening to this or to put it down. This is just pointing something that you know out, to put it down and then go back to protecting your no gap by finding other people that agree that that no gap has an exclamation point. So that's the idea of trying to build an airplane in the sky. It just doesn't work. So the shadow gap is that deeper layer. That's the self-inflicted version of the no gap. You know, I tell a story of the 2 arrows of suffering with in Buddhism. In Buddhism, they say that the first arrow of suffering, you have no control over. It's the one that is pulled. That is the thing that happens. But the second arrow of suffering is the one that you actually pull and shoot yourself in the foot because you control the second arrow. That's your response. So if you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot with an arrow, shoot it somewhere else. Have a healthy response. So the self-inflicted secondary phase of the no gap, and that's when you consciously or unconsciously distract yourself with impossible tasks, or you give meaning to external meaningless tasks. Think about what that means. Think about what it means to give meaning to external meaningless tasks, meaning take something that means nothing and make it mean something. And what's the detriment of that? Wasting time, moving to a place where things are not getting done. And you're doing that to avoid facing responsibilities. So there's that above and below the line. So if you're in a shadow gap, that's kind of the cognitive bias. That's the idea of beating a dead horse. It's already dead. You don't have to beat it anymore. And if you continue beating the dead horse, you're just wasting time. And you might get frustrated that you've wasted time up until now, but you also have to ask yourself how that served you wasting time. And then you'll notice that that was a very skillful approach at removing yourself from responsibility. I love this. So in other words, rather than leaving it where it belongs behind you, your shadow, you allow your shadow to lead the way in your decision-making process, which makes no sense. Another way of looking at that is when you listen to something I say and then you say, yeah, but, that's you bringing your but into the question. A lot of yeah, but people out there. Yeah, but there's the cognitive bias. There's the shadow gap coming into play. And that's you taking something that's behind you, your butt, and letting it come in front of you. And rather than being open and curious, being a scientist and saying, tell me more. If it's better, I will entertain it. Are you willing to entertain a more efficient way of living? If you are, you're going to have a wonderful life. So let's see. I came up with some different metaphors, but the essential shift is to first notice the pattern, catch yourself, mid-spiral, when you catch yourself drifting, and then give it a name. Now you have the name. You can give it a name called the no gap. And then after that, you decide to shift. This is a very interface response system approach. Is you have to first allow yourself to acknowledge that these things are happening. And now before you retreat, right? You have the pink pill, remember, that can turn into the red pill. You've got a name to it, and you can actually now consciously name it when it's happening. And that lays the groundwork for shifting. That's drifting and shifting. And I came up with a metaphor called yelling at the weather. And that's the idea, is another version of a no gap and a shadow gap, is you can't control the sky. Rain is coming when you look at the sky, but you still find yourself standing at the window, shaking your fist, yelling at the sky while your umbrella waits at the door, which says, just use me. That's the no gap. Now, on the other side, now imagine yourself choosing to stand there all afternoon, yelling at the clouds, yelling at the sky, not because you think that it's going to change the weather, but because it gives you the excuse to avoid doing your work that day. Have you ever, I know as kids we did that. It's like getting a snow day. Have you ever had a call from a client that is going to potentially increase your business and you kind of hope that they don't show up? That's the space that I'm talking about. It's like this idea of allowing ourselves to remove ourselves from responsibility. So I give you a reflection exercise, and that is the idea of spotting it, and I correlate it, and I give you a bunch of cool references. So anyway, that's the KnowGap. That's a new system and a new approach from the Make Sense coaching system and the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. I hope you love it. Follow the Substack, everything that you ever need to access through me. This will live on YouTube and maybe on Instagram. I love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day. And just remember, you are now armed with awareness, and that gives you a choice. That gives you a choice in every single thing that happens today. Your choice is in how you look at things. You can change the way that you look at things today by just simply allowing yourself to have a different vantage point, to look at things through a different vantage point. That's why I wear these glasses. That's why I say, all the time. I want to give myself a fighting chance to look at things from all different types of perspectives so I can find the best one, the one that suits me and leverages the odds of me just simply following through today rather than getting caught up in a day full of Shadowgap. And then you have to go find somebody to help you do shadow work, right? Remember, every time you screw something up, there's somebody out there that helps you with that, right? So what I'm offering you, and in the Make Sense Academy, it's the service is less than something you'll probably spend on that money on today you don't even need, for amazing support and mentorship and all of the coursework we do. It's $100 a month for coaching with me. But learn the interface response system and interact with other people and put it into play. You'll find that all the coursework that we give you starts to work. Love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day. This has been fun. And I hope that you have an amazing week as the dominant force of your life. Remember, if you learned something today, give it away. That's the only way it's going to stay. Bye-bye now.